Welcome to Conversations in Confidence. This week we have the amazing, and she is truly amazing, Pavita Cooper, who is a fantastic advocate for diversity in boardrooms. She works with business, that's how we met.
That's right.
Yeah, business leaders, also with government, and you are chair of the 30% Club.
That's right, I am.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you, Emma.
Before we start on some of your advice on confidence, it'd be great to just hear a little bit about kind of your career and how you got here. What are the sort of career chapters that you've gone through?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I didn't have a plan, and I certainly had
I think that's really reassuring.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't think this is where I would end up. You know, if you told sort of 14-year-old me, who was quite shy and the daughter of immigrants and came from a very working class background and we had very little, when I looked out at other people that I admired, and they weren't in our immediate circle or network, they were the parents of friends at school or people I saw on TV or people I read about in magazines, I never thought I could be any of those things. So this has all happened very accidentally, not intentionally, but it sort of makes sense now that I'm here. And I started my career in retail because I used to have a Saturday job in retail, and I looked at all the managers who had been flown in and were moving around various stores, and I thought it looked very glamorous. And I was also really, really good with people, so it felt like a natural home, and I moved up really, really quickly and found myself in a natural home. And I was then headhunted. I went off to work for Shell. I then went into banking, and I just found myself moving in directions I never thought would be possible. And then when I got to the end of my executive career, it felt like the time that I really wanted to focus on giving back to society and helping shape the top of businesses across UK PLC. And then I found myself doing all these amazing things.
I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary career. I mean, perhaps before we start talking about kind of confidence, which is at the heart of what we're talking about today, could you just talk a little bit about your role as chair of the 30% Club and what that organisation is here to do? Because some people listening won't be as familiar as other people are.
So we're a campaign. We were established in 2010 by the very phenomenal Baroness Helena Morrissey, and I have been involved since almost very nearly the beginning, so that's 16 years this year. And we're a campaign that was set up to work with business by getting men to work alongside women to advocate for change. And at the time, back in 2010, in terms of representation of women on boards, it was about 9%, and it was a world where there wasn't really a debate about why we needed more women on boards. Now, across the entire FTSE, we have 43% of women on boards in the UK, which is absolutely phenomenal. We are second only to France, and one of the few nations that's done it without quotas. This has been a business-led, voluntary campaign. But unfortunately, what we haven't seen is a trickle down when it comes to the executive pipeline. So in the UK at the moment, in our biggest companies in the FTSE 100, we are down to 7 female CEOs.
I was going to ask you, so if you go back to 2010, how many female CEOs were there?
So the data wasn't collected until 2011 when Mervyn Davies set up the Davies Review, and at that time we had 5. We peaked in 2024 at 11, which was great. We were starting to see really steady progress. We have seen a steady decline.
I think that's the important thing to acknowledge here, that we're not going forwards at the moment.
Well, unfortunately, not only are we stagnating, we're declining very fast. You know, so in December we were at 7. When the new BP CEO, who's currently a CEO-elect, steps up in April, we'll go up to 8. The more concerning trend is that for all of those women who stepped down last year, they have all been replaced by men. Now, I'm not advocating for tokenism, that we should just appoint women for the sake of it. Clearly, we all want the most successful, most capable individuals in those jobs. But if we are saying in this country we don't have more than 5 or 6 or 7 women who can run our largest companies, then I think something's gone very wrong.
And can you talk also about the other kind of key roles? Because I know that's something that the 30% Club are working on in terms of the number of chairs. And so if you take a board, you know, the key roles are the CEO, the CFO, the chair and the SID. Can you talk a little bit about that? So are we making progress there?
We are, yes and no. And I think the optics look good, but when you really get underneath them, it's not necessarily, we're not seeing the change we want to. So we've got about 19% of female chairs at the moment, which is not bad. The biggest increase we've seen is in the SID population. Almost half of the SIDs are women.
SID is Senior Independent Director.
And that's because the government set a target to say of your top most senior roles, which is chair, SID, CEO and CFO, you must have 30% of women. And so personally, I would argue that perhaps what's really happened is the SID chair has been used as a sort of a holding position in which to appoint women to meet this target. So one of those must be a woman. because what you're not seeing is a correlated increase in the number of female chairs. Because you could argue historically the SID route has been one of the most typical ways in which you become chair. We're seeing that trend decline. So people are being appointed chair from outside the organisation. So I'm not saying this is intentional, it could be an unintended consequence, but the increased number of SIDs is not leading to suddenly more women in the chair role. And I think the bigger concern is when we look at the data that looks at ExCo and ExCo -1, we look at female representation, that's up at 35%. That feels really healthy. The problem is many of those women are not in what we would refer to as the power jobs, the jobs from which you can then succeed to be CEO. They're often CHRO, HR Director, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Operational Officer, CTO, all of these various acronyms, but they're not in the big divisional P&L jobs which mean that you can then go on to be CEO. So we're just not seeing the progression, and we didn't see that trickle down from all those women on boards.
Okay, so I suppose why we're doing this is actually to try and think about how we help women that are on the pipeline or thinking about being on the pipeline develop their own confidence. As somebody who has sat sort of observing female leaders in various guises, either as a board member or as a coach, I know you also coach, you know, what's your perspective on the importance of confidence for women if they're going to succeed in business?
I think confidence is important for all leaders because to a degree what you're doing is instilling confidence in others through your confidence. However, I do feel that there is a gender difference here, and I think often what happens is, not just in business, I see it in government as well, in the civil service, that confidence is often used as a proxy for competence, and they are two very different things. And I think women tend to focus very much on their competence, and I'm generalising hugely here, but I think what men often do, they really focus on confidence as a way of instilling a sense of confidence in others around their own capability and competence, and that's the difference that I see.
So if you go back, because we want to give people sort of listening to this some sort of practical tips, go back to the younger Pavita, the Pavita that was sort of muscling her way up through retail. When did you work out that you were kind of confident and really kind of able to sort of be at the table? Was there a moment? Can you remember? Have you got a perspective on that?
I remember feeling often very much lacking in confidence because in every scenario I was in, whether that was at school or whether that was when I entered the workforce, I felt very different to everybody else. I knew I had a very different background, I knew I had a very different lived experience, hadn't necessarily been afforded some of the opportunity of other people around me. And as I started to progress the career ladder, I was often the youngest person, the only woman, the only person of colour. And so I got so used to being into situations where I was the only person of that background that I taught myself to feel more confident because I knew that my point of difference was what had brought me there. And so I didn't necessarily start feeling hugely confident, but I looked around and thought, well, I'm just as good as these other people. I can do it too. So I sort of allowed myself to feel that way and walked into the room feeling that sense of confidence.
And do you think now, looking back, that in a way your difference is your superpower? That gave you your rocket fuel, some of that?
I don't think I was conscious or aware of it at the time, but I definitely think that probably is what happened. But it came at a price because if you're someone from a minority background, you do a lot of code switching. So in the workplace, you might be a certain version of yourself, but at home, you're being the sort of more authentic, truer version of yourself. So for example, you know, I would imagine that people didn't understand very much about my religion, my background, my upbringing. In fact, my parents were immigrants. They came here with just £10 and started with nothing. They often sort of looked at me and just assumed I was like everybody else. But I had all these other lived experiences that meant that my experience in the world and in life and in the workplace was very different. And that can be quite stressful when you're showing up in a way where you minimise all that parts of you that are different in order to make other people feel okay about you. And it wasn't until I got into my non-executive career that I felt I want to be much more of me.
Yeah. And would you advise people now, as they're thinking about developing their own confidence, to be much more conscious of that rather than to suppress it as a young woman coming through the workforce? Or do you think you still have to play by a sort of set of rules?
I mean, you know this better than anyone. You know, you are chairing in some, you know, the really big companies. You're often the only woman in the room. The reality is I'd love to say to young women, yes, of course, just be whoever you want to be. And I deeply believe that. But I also recognise that when you're trying to navigate complex matrix organisations, and particularly when you get to very top and you're in a minority, whatever that minority is, you could be a man and be in a minority, by the way, that you do have to learn to understand the rules that are being played, because if you don't, then you're not going to be successful. I really want young women to feel they can very much be who they are and give themselves permission to do that. But I think you also have to be astute and attuned to what the rules of engagement are in whatever environment you're in.
Yeah, and yes, I mean, I think EQ is probably really underrated as a leadership trait, isn't it? Okay, so I've known you only as an incredibly successful leader, coach, friend. But one of the things we're talking about with people is actually that everybody has moments where they have setbacks and have their confidence knocked. I mean, would you have advice for people on how you handle that for yourself? I mean, I'm assuming I should have asked the question. Do you?
Loads. I mean, I have it all the time. I've had plenty of things that haven't worked or haven't gone my way, or things that I've sort of felt I've let myself down. I've looked and thought that could have gone differently, or it's a sense of failure. However, I think one of the things I've always learnt to do is bounce back really quickly. So I normally give myself like a day, possibly. My husband's very funny. He'll always say to me, okay, you can mope about for a day, but that's it. And he's a good sort of foil for that, sort of not allow me to, not to wallow too much. But I think I really appreciate him doing that, because I think probably I have got the tendency to sort of indulge myself and feel sorry for myself. And he's quite good at saying, no, he's the CEO. He's right, get on with it now. And so I allow myself to feel that sort of sense of disappointment or loss or frustration or anger if something hasn't quite gone the way I wanted it to. But then I think what I'm really good at doing is saying, okay, this is an opportunity to reset. This is not necessarily about me, it's about a bigger context, it's about something probably completely unrelated to me. Brush myself down and get back on with it. You said before we came on air today, you woke up this morning, you're thinking, what do you feel grateful for? I'm generally a very optimistic person, so I can bounce back quite quickly and say, right, let's reframe. What are we going after now? Off we go.
Yeah.
And I think that helps with confidence as well, not allowing yourself to wallow too long.
Our mission through this series is to really set women up to feel more confident this year. So what would be your one piece of advice for 2026, this kind of crazy bonkers world we live in, where there's a lot of macro uncertainty? What would your one piece of advice be for this year in particular for women as they're thinking about how they develop to be sort of bigger and braver and more confident?
I would imagine I'm going to be at the very other end of my career to the young women that are listening today, and I would say that having been in the workplace a very long time, my biggest insight is don't wait to feel confident. I regularly go into situations where I have not a lack of confidence, but a sense of uncertainty about how things might play out, and you can practice feeling confident. So I often take a moment. It can be a meeting with one person I'm going into, maybe a chair. It could be I'm going onto stage with 500 people. It could be a tricky meeting with maybe a board, which is 10 people. But I always just take a moment to sort of visualise, how do I want to be in that meeting? And I try and vision and think ahead, what do I think the outcome might be? What would success look like? And I really see it in my mind's eye. And I see that as a practice of practicing to feel confident. And I spend, even now after all this time, lots of times going to situations where people probably don't realise, but I don't necessarily feel confident, but I've been able to demonstrate or build a confidence in terms of a muscle that I can use and learn to deploy when I need it. And so I would say don't wait to feel confident.
Don't wait, that's such a great piece of advice. Anyway, it's just so wonderful to have you talking this, and you're somebody who definitely has inspired me and helps me feel.
You.
And
vice versa.
And I'm on the campaign too. It'd be great to see more female leaders, and we just need to make sure that people are wanting, are looking up and going, I want to break that glass ceiling.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pavita.
Thank you.
Join us next time for another conversation in confidence.